is the Fender Standard Series Stratocaster, and we're talking about the new made in Indonesia model. Yeah, is it basically trash? Well, based on everything that I've seen coming out over the last few days, I gotta say, yeah, to be honest, I think it kind of is. Now, full disclosure, I do not have a new Fender Standard guitar here with me. I've never played one, and frankly, I have no intention of ever getting one. My opinions on this guitar are based pretty much entirely on both the information that's available online, including Fender's marketing materials, and of course, independent reviews and group discussions. Now, with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna tell you why I have no interest in this guitar and why I think that it's a huge miss for Fender. But yeah, you should definitely take this with a grain of whatever it is that you'd like a grain of, because it is, after all, just some dude's opinion. But in a nutshell, what do I think is wrong with this guitar? Well, to be honest, I think there's a lot wrong with it, but if I had to sum it up into a single bite-sized explanation, I would say this. You're basically being upcharged on a $429 Squier guitar to the tune of $599, and all you're really getting is some Fender logos. Now, that's not necessarily a terrible thing in a vacuum. I mean, a Squier Classic Vibe is actually a pretty good guitar, and lots of people would be happy with a guitar that's both pretty good and a guitar that has a Fender logo on it. So I get why a lot of people might like this guitar, and I expect that it will probably be popular. So here's the real issue that I have with this guitar, and that's that Fender calls it the Standard, but it doesn't really meet the expectations that I think that we should have for a guitar labeled the Standard. There's really nothing standard about this model. It's just kind of cut a bunch of corners, and it's kind of cheap in a really bad way. Now, in my opinion, and for all intents and purposes, I would say that the current Fender Standard is the American Professional series of guitars, and that's effectively the guitar that I have right here. Pretty much. Now, I say pretty much because this guitar here is actually a Fender American Series Mod Shop guitar, but it's spec'd exactly like the American Pro. It's just in a 2-color sunburst finish, which is a color that they didn't offer in the American Pro lineup when I bought this guitar several years ago. So yeah, with that said, I got some, experience with Fender Stratocasters and, what I consider to be the Standard, and what I think most people do as well. Now, what's the expected specs for the American Standard type of guitar, and how does this new Indonesian model miss the mark on all of these features? Well, to start with, the American model has a 2-piece alder body, and the new Indonesian series, or Indonesian Standard, has a 3 or I think even a 4-piece poplar body. And look, it's not a tone wood issue. I don't buy into the idea that the type of wood makes a tonal difference in electric guitars much at all, really. This complaint that I have is based pretty much entirely on both the look and the style of the wood, but also, more importantly, meeting that standard. The traditional alder body that we've come to know and love in these guitars. I mean, heck, even the $799 Mexican player guitar has an alder body. That has become and been viewed as the standard for the wood that these guitars should be built out of, in my experience and in my opinion. Now, next up we have the pickups, and again, both the Mexican Player Series and the American Series use Alnico magnet pickups, which is kind of the standard for a Strat. But this new model is, of course, called the Standard, but it uses ceramic pickups, pretty much like the much less expensive import Squier guitar. And are ceramic pickups bad? I mean, no, not really, not in a vacuum. That's not really the point. It's not whether or not the pickups are good or bad, it's whether or not they're the standard. And it's not the standard for these guitars to use ceramic. It's a cost-cutting measure or feature. Now, another wood discrepancy is on the fingerboard, whereas the American Pro and the Mexican Player both feature rosewood, which again is pretty standard, but both of the import models, and by both we mean the lower cost Squier and this new Fender Standard, use Indian laurel on the fingerboard or the fretboard, which I gotta say, in my opinion, doesn't look nearly as nice. I mean, I dislike fingerboards that are in like laurel or jatoba materials so much that I've sworn them off entirely. If I'm going to buy a less expensive guitar, and if it comes in a maple and a laurel option, I'm buying the maple fingerboard option. I mean, I will buy less expensive or even cheap guitars. I've got no problem with them, and I've got no problem owning them, but I will never own another laurel fingerboard guitar. I just hate the look. That applies to a lot of the other rosewood-like fingerboards. Like, again, Ibanez uses Jatoba a lot. I just hate it. But I guess, yeah, that's not really standard either, is it? Now, another thing that we could split hairs about when it comes to the wood, and it's specifically on the back of the neck, is the import guitars don't have the skunk stripe like this guitar has going down the center. And again, that's kind of a standard feature. And yeah, I think it should probably be on a guitar that's called the Standard. Now on the new import Standard, there is another little difference, and that has to do with the saddles on the bridge. On the regular, quote unquote Standard, the American model here, versus the new one, yeah, they're different. And look, that's not really a big deal other than, yeah, it's just not a very standard feature to have block saddles on the new one. Whereas on, the guitars that we've come to be accustomed to, they don't use block saddles. Now, it's also kind of shocking to me that a Standard Series guitar doesn't come with any sort of case or even a gig bag. I mean, in my mind, a Standard Series guitar should be thought of as the working man's guitar, and a gigging musician would almost certainly want, or frankly would need, a guitar case. So that is pretty stupid in my opinion, despite the fact that me personally, I don't want any more cases. I have too many to store in my closet as it is. Still, I think a standard guitar should probably come with one. Now, aside from the feature differences, what else is wrong with this guitar series, the new Standard Series? Well, in several of the reviews that I have seen, things like the overall quality of construction appear to be a little bit hit or miss, and frankly, I gotta say I would expect that from an Indonesian guitar. Unfortunately. I've bought and subsequently returned a lot of Far East made guitars from brands like Ibanez and Jackson, Epiphone, yeah, lots of them, lots of others as well. And the issues are that they don't always put the same level of care into construction that yields a consistently well-made guitar, I guess is how I would put it. And that's key, consistency. Like, yes, you will get a good guitar out of those factories, pretty often in fact, but it's always going to be a little bit of a coin flip on whether or not you're going to get one of those, or if you're going to get something that probably should have found its way into the trash bin. That's just the nature of the beast with these low-cost import guitars. So yeah, I expect quality will be an issue with a lot of these guitars. And yeah, on guitars that are $500 and over, that really just shouldn't be something that the player needs to be dealing with. I mean, I've seen a couple of Schecter guitars in the $500, $600, maybe up to $800 range. And they were all set up and built really, really well. So I know that it can be done, and it can be done consistently. Anyway, in my opinion, here's what Fender should have done. And actually, I have two ideas. First, they could have just made a guitar in Indonesia that meets the same spec and the same quality as the American Pro Series, like the guitar that I have here. And if, you're going to make an import Standard, make it meet that standard. I mean, I would have loved to have seen a guitar matching the quality of a guitar like this, an American Professional Series, as an import for a lot less money. I think that would have been awesome. And I know people are going to argue that it would have been a lot more expensive to do that if they were going to make those guitars meet this level of quality. But I don't know. I don't see why it would have been much more expensive than what they're already offering this guitar at. I mean, we're only talking about 4 or 5 different specification changes. It's not that big of a difference. And those few little things could have went a really long way into making that guitar worth the money. But secondly, here's another idea, and a really easy solution. They could have just renamed the Mexican Player Series to the Fender Standard Series and called this new Indonesian-made guitar the Player, or called it something else entirely. It doesn't matter. Because as it stands right now, when we're comparing the specs of all of these guitars, The made in Mexico model is probably much closer to something that I'd consider the standard than this new import model. But yeah, honestly, Fender should be a little bit ashamed of themselves. I have to say they really sold the brand out, and they sold out their customers on this one. And instead of producing a great quality import bearing the Fender name and the standard moniker, they just rebranded a Squier, marked up the price a couple of $100, and they're basically just crossing their fingers and hoping the general public won't notice or they won't care. I'm disappointed in the brand, to say the least, and I would absolutely not recommend these new standard models to anyone asking. I would say save your money and get something cheaper like the Squier, or spend a little bit more money and get the Mexican Player Series. Or, honestly, just buy a different brand guitar altogether. I mean, if Fender has so little respect for their customers as to try something like this, why would we even want to keep giving them our money at all?